It being 4:30, the clerk has advised me we have a quorum, and those witnesses as well as committee members that are appearing virtually have been sound tested, and we are good to begin meeting number 86 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is beginning its study on the implications of artificial intelligence technologies for the Canadian labour force. Today's meeting has taken place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Meeting members are attending in person as well as attending virtually. You have the option to speak in the official language of your choice. In the room, interpretation is available by using your headset. Virtually, at the bottom of your surface, you will have a globe icon. Click on it, and it'll give you the option of choosing to speak in the official language of your choice. If there is an interruption in translation services, please get my attention. Those virtually use the raised hand icon, and I will suspend while it is being corrected. I would also ask committee members or those witnesses to speak slowly for the benefit of the translation team. And for those in the room, please keep your earpiece away from the mic to prevent popping and possible hearing damage to the translators. It would be appreciated. Please direct all comments through the chair and wait until I recognize you. As well, when we get to the witness, please indicate who you're directing your questions to. Beginning with, and as you're aware today, because we had a couple drop out, there's one panel for an hour and a half. We have the Canadian Labour Congress, Chris Roberts, National Director, who's with us in the room. We have from the Council of Canadian Innovators, Laurent Carbonneau in the room. From the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, appearing from France virtually, Marguerite Lane. Bienvenue, Madame. Statistics Canada, Vincent Dale.
Welcome, ma'am.
Because of the timeline, I'm going to ask Ms. Lane to begin with her opening statements, and then we will go through the rest of the witnesses. Ms. Lane, you have the floor for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so accommodating with the timing. So I'm an economist in the Future of Work unit at the OECD. And so I'm going to use my 5 minutes to describe, firstly, what I think makes AI different to previous technologies. Second, what impact AI is already having on the labour market. And third, where policymakers should really be focusing their efforts. So first, what makes AI to previous technologies from a labour market perspective? I think we can all agree that the sheer speed and scale of progress is quite interesting because AI can essentially learn and iterate, and because it has applications in practically every industry and practically every occupation. I think that in 20 or 30 years, AI will be so deeply embedded in our society and in our work that it will be difficult to imagine life or work before it. I think we can think of it in the same league as technologies like the internet or electricity. Unlike previous technologies, AI can perform non-routine cognitive tasks, which means that many high-skill occupations, for instance, engineers and scientists, are particularly exposed to AI. And these are jobs that have been traditionally more sheltered from automation. They did things that technology couldn't. Now, I'm not saying that these occupations will disappear, but certainly I think these occupations will be transformed by AI, and that's something interesting about this technology. Then, particularly interesting about AI as well is the many applications it has in hiring and management. And this, I think, brings new opportunities, but also new challenges to the work environment. So I'll now move to the impact on the labour market, which the OECD has been assessing through its own data collection exercises. And we tend to to see things through the kind of framework of job quantity, job quality, and inclusiveness. So in terms of job quantity, we don't really see big signs that AI has impacted employment, at least so far. I guess aggregate employment is what I mean there. So when economists have done empirical studies looking at aggregate employment statistics, there's not really any strong evidence of mass displacement due to AI. And in a survey that the OECD conducted last year, which Canada actually participated in, over half of the firms that use AI that we talked to told us that it had had no impact on employment in their firms. Among those that reported that there was a change, they were actually relatively evenly split between saying that AI increased and AI decreased employment. Why is it that AI doesn't seem to have had a massive effect on employment, or it hasn't reduced employment? Well, firms told us that AI mostly tends to automate tasks rather than jobs. They tell us that, the AI just isn't quite there yet. And where AI does automate a job, firms said that they tend to manage this through reallocating workers to other business areas. They tend to, and through relying on slowing hiring and through attrition and retirement. So taking all of this together with the fact that employment levels are currently high in most OECD countries, and given what we expect to see in terms of an aging population in many OECD countries as well in the next couple of decades, I don't think we are so concerned that AI is leading to, the end of work. However, I think there's certainly a lot of potential for disruption as workers have to adapt to changing skill needs. The same OECD survey found positive results for job quality, but also some risks. So workers who use AI were overwhelmingly positive about its impact on, for example, job satisfaction and health and safety. A large part of this, I think, is that AI tends to automate a lot of dangerous and tedious tasks. And also workers told us that they appreciated when AI assisted them in decision-making as well. At the same time, most workers who use AI said that AI increased the pace at which they work. Now, this could be AI enhancing their productivity, which I guess would be, in a way, logical. But at the same time, we know that increased work intensity can also induce psychosocial risks, such as increased stress and anxiety. Many workers also expressed concern that data collection in the workplace could infringe on their privacy and could lead to decisions biased against them. And many workers supported banning or restricting the use of AI in processes around the hiring and firing of workers. Then there are some implications for inclusiveness too. Even if it is the case that high-skilled workers are more exposed to AI compared to technologies of the past, I think it still remains a big concern that those with lower skills, or whether those with lower skills have the ability and have the resources to adapt. These people might be in more precarious positions, they may have less bargaining power, and they may find it more difficult to reskill or upskill.
You,
And
Ms.
when the
Lane,
OECD,
if
yes.
you could conclude your comments and what you missed, we could deal with it in questions. If you could just shortly wrap.
Perfect. So I think there's obviously a need to for policymakers to act. In some cases, that can be done through existing legislation, for example, legislation on discrimination, rights to organize, and so on. But obviously, other countries are developing AI-specific legislation and soft law. Training and worker consultation will be extremely important. And of course, we need good evidence to track developments in this area, which the OECD will continue working on. Thank you.
Ms. Lane. Mr. Roberts, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. Greetings, Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. I want to begin by commending the committee for initiating this very important study. The impact of AI on work and employment is increasingly the focus of the attention of unions in Canada. In 2022, the CLC formed a task force on AI and automation, comprised of unions from the public and private sector and a range of industries and occupations. When asked, many workers report being optimistic about the potential of AI applications to improve and enrich work. It could do this by automating simple, repetitive tasks, allowing more time and attention to be devoted to non-routine, creative, and skill-intensive tasks. And this aligns with the OECD research, finding that workers report improved performance and even improved job satisfaction following the introduction of AI applications in their work. It also fits with the view that, as with many new technologies, AI has no intrinsic implications for the quality of work and employment. Technology is shaped by the social structures and power relations within which it is designed, developed, and adopted. What matters are the choices we make about the direction of AI research and how AI is developed and deployed. In the words of one economist, AI can be a powerful tool for deploying the creativity, judgment, and flexibility of humans rather than simply automating their jobs. But AI also has the capacity to reinforce existing inequities of income, wealth, and power, aggravating the discrimination, exclusion, and insecurity that many vulnerable workers face, undermining privacy rights of workers as producers and consumers, and creating risks of individual and societal harms. Many workers raise concerns about displacement and job loss. As AI automates not only routine but also non-routine cognitive tasks, the potential for job displacement will rise. Automation historically has had the greatest impact on low-skilled and semi-skilled jobs, but workers in high-skilled occupations now find themselves vulnerable to AI-driven displacement. In addition to job loss, a significant concern is the potential for discrimination, monitoring and surveillance at work, a weakening of privacy rights around the extraction, use, and sharing of personal information, and the potential for individual labor and human rights violations. AI deployed in human resource management functions, hiring, performance evaluation, promotion, discipline, and termination is a particular source of worry. Already, gig workers working for digital platforms struggle with unaccountable algorithmic management and arbitrary deactivations. Facial and voice recognition technology deployed in workplaces like airports and technologies that monitor and collect information on workers' physical health are troubling. Workers in the marine ports already struggle with unfair and arbitrary decisions around security clearances. Automated decision-making deploying pattern recognition algorithms could make these decisions even more unjust and arbitrary. Finally, creative sector workers and those in the performing arts are worried about retaining control over their names, images, and likenesses, and ensuring fair compensation for their work. Canada's unions have one overriding message for policymakers on AI. As employers deploy AI systems, workers want greater transparency, information sharing, consultation, and participation. They want the right to be informed, to be consulted, and to participate in the process. And they want access to training and labor adjustment. Our recommendations to the government include the following. The government should outline a vision and roadmap for appropriate regulation of AI development and adoption in workplaces. This should include a strategy for ensuring a voice for workers and unions in the regulation and oversight of AI. It starts with a representative advisory council on AI. This would not only be able to make recommendations about emerging areas of concern for policymakers, but also identify research gaps, data and research needs, and strategies for disseminating this research. Right now, workers have relatively limited rights to be informed, to have access to training, and to be involved in the introduction of new technologies. Access to vocational education and training is highly uneven in Canada, and labor adjustment is comparatively weak. I see that my time has come to an end, Chair, so I will leave my recommendations there and hopefully follow up in the Q&A. Thank you.
Roberts, Mr. Carbonneau.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to discuss AI policy issues with you here today. My name is Laurent Carbonneau, and I'm here today as the Director of Policy and Research of the Council of Canadian Innovators, or CCI. CCI is a national business council representing 150 of Canada's leading technology companies, and we're dedicated to advocating for policies that promote innovation, economic growth, and long-term prosperity for all Canadians. Our member companies are all headquartered here in Canada, employ north of 52,000 employees across the country, and are market leaders in the sectors of health, clean and financial technologies, cybersecurity, and of course AI. AI will be a defining challenge of our time for policymakers. A new, genuinely general-purpose family of technologies like AI could well have impacts on the world of work and the economy, like those created by industrialization and electrification. I'll stress here that those transitions pose profoundly difficult policy challenges to governments, challenges that many were not able to meet equitably, and it is good that this issue is getting active parliamentary scrutiny. With that said, I think it is very premature to worry about things like large-scale job losses. Canadian businesses as a whole are facing the opposite problem: low productivity and an immense appetite for more labor. This is not normal for advanced economies, and we should take a quick look under the hood of Canada's overall economic picture. In terms of productivity, which is GDP per hour worked by one measure, we recently clocked in under the OECD average, just behind Italy and just ahead of Turkey and Spain. And we look much worse than they do on measures of work-life balance, where we're tied at 30th with the United States for leisure time, once again below the OECD average. Our net income, which counts taxes paid and services like healthcare received, has us 13th in the world, behind rich countries like the US, but also behind small economies like Belgium. Canadians are working a lot to earn modest incomes even after accounting for services like healthcare and education. And according to recent Statistics Canada data, productivity has actually just dipped below where it was at the same point in 2018. There's been no growth over the last 5 years. There's no getting around the fact that addressing the big challenges of our time, poverty, climate change, reconciliation, to name a few, requires us to be a richer and more productive country than we are now, and to do more with the same or fewer resources. AI is fundamentally a family of technologies that makes labor and capital inputs both more efficient. Research, development, commercialization, and adoption of AI collectively present an important opportunity for Canada to correct our worrying economic trajectory. We should work to make adoption of AI technologies that make our businesses more efficient and our economy better off overall a priority. What is important to understand about the economics of AI is that while AI is a novel technology, it does not defy the general way that the economics of innovation works. Companies that are commercializing new innovations, particularly in information technology, succeed because they own intangible assets like patents that exclude rivals, they control vast amounts of data, and they leverage network effects to make their products and services more useful to users. Because of those fundamental drivers of success, today's innovation economy is characterized by superstar firms equipped with the IP assets, data, and networks they need to fend off competitors. AI is a heavily IP and data-dependent business. The successful AI-driven businesses of the near future will replicate that winner-take-most pattern. Policymakers focused on creating lasting and inclusive prosperity should prioritize growing Canadian competitors into global champions and leveraging their success into broad-based gains for the country. The broad AI sector is currently valued around $200 billion, and by 2030 will likely expand to around $2 trillion. Canada is well positioned in the industry in terms of highly qualified personnel and leading research, but Canadian companies face significant barriers while scaling. A lack of scaling Canadian companies means that many of the benefits created from public investment in research and training, including intellectual property, are accruing to firms outside of Canada. For example, nearly 75% of intellectual property rights, including patents, generated through the federal government's Pan-Canadian AI strategy are owned by foreign entities, including American tech giants like Uber, Meta, and Alphabet. The Scale AI Global Innovation Cluster recently published a report that identifies barriers to adoption for Canadian companies. Companies face serious issues of access to top talent, despite our impressive research strength, because of lower wages compared to American competitors, among other issues. Canada's AI talent pool has actually shrunk by nearly 20% over the last 3 years, and this is showing up in low rates of adoption. 48% of Canadian companies report not using AI, below the 36% in the US, 38% in the UK, and nearly 39% in France. It's still unclear what AI will mean for the future of work and broad employment patterns, but one thing that is most immediately clear is that in a potentially era-defining niche in a winner-take-most sector, Canada cannot afford to move into the future as a late adopter of AI with little domestic capacity. That is a recipe for stagnation. Canada's innovators want to build the next generation of global AI players here in Canada. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carbonneau. Now for Stats Canada, Mr. Frenette or Mr. Dale for 5 minutes.
It'll be me, yeah. Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for inviting us to this meeting. We're pleased to be able to inform you around the around discussions on the implications of artificial intelligence for the Canadian labour force. Rapidly advancing technologies can perform some of the work humans do. Automation, which is rule-based and follows predetermined instructions, has been capable of executing routine or manual work tasks for some time. More recently, significant advances in artificial intelligence, or AI, which makes predictions based on data somewhat like humans do, have created new concerns for workers involved in cognitive or non-routine work. Generally speaking, technology can have pros and cons for workers. Some workers can have their job transformed by it or even be completely replaced. On the other hand, technology can potentially boost productivity as workers can focus on higher-level tasks, which are better rewarded in the labor market, while robots and computer algorithms handle the more repetitive tasks. More productive workers could help Canadian businesses become more competitive in global markets, which could improve standards of living for Canadians through job creation and increased wages. Our data suggests that so far technology adoption does not appear to be associated with widespread job losses, but it does appear to be associated with job transformation. Indeed, between 1987 and 2019, just before the COVID-19 pandemic, Canadian jobs were slowly moving away from routine manual tasks and towards non-routine cognitive tasks. This was perhaps expected as manufacturing and other industries implemented automated technologies to perform repetitive tasks, although other factors such as increasing international trade may have also played a role. The reasons why these trends were gradual, despite significant developments in both automation and artificial intelligence, are unknown. However, some of the possible factors that may have slowed the adoption of the more advanced technologies include the high investment cost required to implement the technology, regulations, as well as societal resistance to public-facing technologies, such as self-driving cars or robotic doctors. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic may have accelerated the trends in job tasks seen earlier by giving an incentive to firms to invest in automated technologies and AI, allowing them to make their production and delivery processes more resilient to future possible shutdowns. Other factors could have played a role in accelerating these past trends, such as increased demand for goods and services produced by knowledge workers. The data confirm that since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, notable changes have been registered in the nature of work that Canadians do. For example, the share of workers in managerial, professional, and technical jobs, which are largely involve non-routine cognitive work, increased from 32.3% in 2019 up to 36.0% in 2022. This increase over a short 3-year period accounted for almost 1/3 of the total increase registered over the last 35 years. The increase in recent years was counterbalanced by declines in the share of workers in service jobs from 21.3% in 2019 down to 19.2% of all jobs in 2022, and in production, craft, repair, and operative jobs from 21.8% in 2019 down to 20.5% in 2022. All of these trends were largely similar for both men and women. Now, the increase in managerial, professional, and technical occupations and the decline in service occupations were considerably more pronounced during the pandemic among younger workers aged 25 to 34 years compared with older workers, those aged 45 to 54 years. This may not be very surprising as younger workers generally have fewer family obligations and more years to recoup their investments if they choose to retrain for a new career. In any event, the more pronounced trend among younger workers may be indicative of future trends as older workers leave the labor force, making room for younger workers who are more amenable to taking on modern jobs. Now, following the COVID-19 pandemic, another factor that could affect these trends is the very recent and rapid significant developments in artificial intelligence. For example, large language models such as ChatGPT. Unlike previous technological developments, the implementation of advanced AI could potentially lead to significant job transformation among workers performing cognitive tasks, given the capabilities of this technology. Whether or not this will occur is difficult to predict at this time, but it may depend on the presence or absence of previous constraints facing AI adoption, namely high investment costs, regulations, and societal resistance, as I noted earlier. Statistics Canada will continue to monitor and report important developments in these trends based on timely labor force survey data. And census data could also help establish trends for demographic groups of workers who may face particularly high risks. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We would now be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Finette. Before we begin the questioning round, I just want to advise panelists, Ms. Lane may have to leave before we conclude, as it is nearing 11 o'clock at night where she is. So if you have questions for her, just want to advise you she may be leaving. So we will begin with Madame Ferrari for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Very interesting and informative testimony that I hope we get in writing too. Lots of stats coming out from you guys. Ms. Lane, if I could start with you, I think one of the things that folks watching at home and even ourselves here as members of Parliament, what is defining AI? What does that look like for you? What is your definition? Because I think, is it the self-checkouts at the department stores? What is the definition of AI from a workplace perspective?
Ms. Lane, you may be on mute.
Hi. So we tend to define AI as a system, a computer system essentially, that can enable machines or programs to do tasks that typically that would typically require human intelligence. I mean, one thing that is complicated in this area is that even AI developers, experts in AI, will actually disagree on what AI is. They will give you different definitions of AI, and so, as you said, there are many technologies that may or may not be considered AI, depending on who you're talking to. I think.
Sorry to interject.
Yes.
Sorry. Do you think it would be beneficial to have a definition of what it is when you're looking at legislation, a clear definition? And if so, who would be responsible for defining it?
I think it does have to be defined within the legislation. And I do think that this is something that, for example, I know the European Union has struggled with exactly how to define it. And I think the definition they chose certainly attracted some commentary. I have to say, though, I would not be an expert on which systems would fall on. I mean, I wouldn't be in a position to be able to advise on exactly how to define AI, I have to say.
Thank you for that, and thanks for your feedback. Do you think that self-checkout, and I'll just use, like a department store or grocery stores, are those considered AI?
I think they generally wouldn't be considered AI because typically they're scanning like a barcode. However, I would say that if you were in, for example, let's say an Amazon warehouse, and if there was a machine, for example, doing a visual scan of a product and pulling up identifying that product, that generally would be considered as AI. So even when two different technologies, essentially do a very similar thing, one might fall within the definition of AI and the other one might not actually.
Thank you. Yeah, it's pretty hard to even critique it when there's not a definition of what it is. I think sometimes that that seems to be a bit of an issue. If I can jump to Mr. Carbonneau, did I say that correctly? Thank you for your testimony. A lot of stats and interesting insight that you provided to the committee. And I like your foresight of where Canada can be versus where Canada is. And I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit. If you think Canada doesn't jump on this inevitable technology that is here, as we say, the toothpaste is out of the tube, the horse is out of the barn, where do you think that will place Canada if we are not competitive in this market?
Sure. So I'll point once again to the really excellent report that the Scale AI Global Innovation Cluster put together, which does talk a little bit about this, which is we're kind of in a point right now where they see us as having some startup strength and really good research capacity. But the reality is that if we end up not having much of an industry here because our scale-up companies are not able to scale because of kind of the various barriers that they face, both technological and sort of broader in terms of innovation policy, that enables the growth of innovative Canadian companies.
Can you expand on those barriers? What right now is preventing Canadian companies from really sinking their teeth into benefiting from AI?
Sure. So I mentioned labor. Which is a significant one. So companies are having trouble finding people with the right skill sets. And I mentioned we do have good researchers, but a lot of those researchers end up going to work for the Googles, et cetera, of the world, who are able to pay, much, much higher wages with better weather, it should be said in many cases. So, and that's wonderful for them, obviously, and wonderful for the people who get those jobs, but it's probably not great for Canada as a whole, and we should be finding ways to help, companies be able to make things attractive enough for them to stay. That's one piece. Other than that, to some extent, it's uptake. It's customers and markets, because kind of from right at the very beginning, these companies have to be global, because the Canadian market is just not big enough on its own to really act as rocket fuel for these companies to grow. That's another one. I think, this...
Sorry, I only have, I think, 20 seconds left, so I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I just want to jump back to Ms. Lane, if I can, because I know she has to leave. How are you deciding who to survey? You gave a lot of results on companies that you've asked for feedback around AI, but how are you deciding who you ask, especially if there isn't a defined definition of what AI is?
Good question. So we talked to firms and workers within the manufacturing and the financial industries. So that obviously already steers the conversation towards industries where the use of AI is more prevalent and is a bit more mature as well. And we talked to all firms, or we talked to firms whether that are using AI and also that aren't using AI. So a mix of firms essentially.
All right, Mr. Coteau for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of the witnesses that are here today joining us. I think this is an incredible opportunity for this committee to learn from you and for you to share valuable information to help, I think, guide policymakers going forward when it comes to the labor market. I think I'll start with Ms. Lane. Near the end of your presentation, you actually started to talk about the role of policymakers in AI in general. Where do you see policymakers, if you can maybe spend a bit more time on the role you see policymakers should be contributing to the growth and adoption of AI and the expansion of AI into our workforce, and maybe you can just tap into some of the jurisdictions where you see it working well, and perhaps provide some insight on some of the key points that we should always consider when moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really pleased hearing some of the other presenters that there actually seems to be a lot of consensus in what we're seeing. There seems to be a pretty consistent picture emerging in terms of the benefits, but also the dangers of AI. So let me get to this question of what should policymakers be doing? I think the first thing is that, so you want to reap the benefits of AI, and you want to ensure that those benefits are available to everybody and to every company, as well as every worker. And you also want to address the risks that AI pose for workers' fundamental rights and their well-being. I began to describe how existing legislation, of course, is there to deal with some of these risks in terms of legislation for discrimination, data protection, workers' rights to organize, occupational safety and health. And I think that's already a very important starting point. We don't throw those things away just in the face of a new technology. And then, of course, there may be need then for some AI-specific legislation on top of that, and for soft law to adapt as things move forward. Then I think training, or you asked a question about what is working well. Well, I think the firms that are doing well to work, that are working well with AI, getting the benefits out of it, and allowing their workers to benefit from it as well, tend to be those where they're training their workers to use AI, and also where they are consulting their workers about AI as well, where this was mentioned by a previous speaker, but where workers can participate in the process. I think those are two key factors. So public policy for training and education, I think, is very important for addressing changing skill needs. And then, of course, there's a need to ensure that collective bargaining and social dialogue can play a role as well in supporting workers and businesses through the AI transition. I think it's also very important, as I said, for everybody to have the opportunity to benefit from AI. I think this goes back to, I think, education and training. But equally, I think it's important to ensure that, for example, workers working in SMEs, that SMEs also have the ability to adopt AI, that they aren't excluded from the process just because of the data requirements and the heavy IP requirements as well. And then I think policymakers, there's also the requirement to keep track of all of this, to keep on top of all of this. And so, as I mentioned, that's where the OECD's efforts are really focused. For instance,
I'm gonna jump in. I think I have like 1 minute left, 2 minutes left. I really do want to ask some of the other witnesses some questions. But everything you said, this is very valuable information, and I wish I had more time. But I'm going to jump to another witness, and I do apologize for interrupting. Mr. Carbonneau, I wanted to ask you a question around, you talked about IP, and, I know that the CCI has taken a position in the past that a lot of the intellectual property that's coming out of our universities, are removed, and brought to other jurisdictions because there's capital there. There may be more flexibility in those jurisdictions to upscale quickly. One of the criticisms I've heard around why AI doesn't have the potential to grow in jurisdictions like Canada as much as it would in the United States or China is because of the data sets that are being used to actually provide the input into AI for machine learning. Is that necessarily true from your perspective?
That's a good question, and I think I would have to consult with some members to give you a very hard answer. What I would tell you is that hasn't come up. Yeah. What I would say is perhaps on the processing side, access to compute is an issue where perhaps we might hit a bottleneck there in ways that other countries might not. And I believe that the government is perhaps looking at some options around that, which is, I think, all to the good. I do think, we've had excellent efforts like Canary in the past in terms of having some public compute capacity. I think that's a good idea and definitely something we should try to avoid that bottleneck around.
And the 150 tech companies that are part of your consortium, there's been hundreds of millions of dollars invested by Canadian citizens, by government, into supporting research into AI. Do many of these companies benefit from that type of research investments? Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
I think where we fall apart sometimes is just making sure that Canadians see more benefit from the public investment we put in. We do get some, that's undeniable. Yeah. But we want to make sure that I think the proportion of public value for public dollar to Canadians is as high as it can be.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Madame Chabot, pour 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. Ms. Lane, I'd like to speak to while you're still here. Very happy to have a representative from the OECD here with us today. I know it's late for you. So I have two questions. In Quebec, even with the studies that we have the unions who represent workers in these sectors, and they have requested that we speak to witnesses about this. Right now, it might not be very concrete when we speak of the impact of AI. It's somewhat maybe theoretical, trying to predict what will happen. There are a lot of questions being asked in Quebec on the topic of AI, especially concerning ethics. We've seen this, for example, in universities. There are a lot of questions about AI concerning the ethics of this in terms of production in some sectors. For example, something that we should hit the brakes on this. Now, we do know that in any case, this will continue. We've spoken of the law. What do you think would be relevant? What actions could we take now to plan ahead for what's to come and what will be automated in the future? What can we do now, early on, even though we don't have a fully concrete idea of what the impacts will be? I know it's a long question.
Yes, and thank you for that question. I think you talked about how the impact of AI at the moment is not so concrete, it's more theoretical. And I think we're really at an important point, actually, between the theoretical and the realized. In our survey, for example, when we asked workers about the impact on job quality, when we asked employers about the impact on job quantity, we were actually asking about what has happened already. And we did find, that there were already changes happening in the manufacturing industry and the financial industries. So yes, absolutely, much of the impact is theoretical, but I think it's important to note that there are changes happening already. I think there's an important point here about ethics here. I think there are important ethical questions related to AI. I think within the workplace, I do think we already have good tools for dealing with some of the issues that AI raises. For instance, we can talk about the ethical risk in terms of the biases that AI can introduce. But within the workplace, we do have, anti-discrimination legislation. And so I think we can frame things in terms of ethics, and this makes them, I think, sound a little bit more theoretical. But I think we do have real tools already at our disposal to deal with some of the more theoretical or more ethical aspects of AI. I think what's an action that we can already take now? I think we can start thinking already about, how we want to use AI in our society, in our workplace, and what we think are acceptable and good uses of AI. And I do think that can be a starting point for legislation around AI. Just because something can be done, just because something is feasible within the technology doesn't mean that we have to follow through with it. And so I think whether it's as a society or whether it's unions or businesses deciding this, and perhaps all together, I think we can already start to talk about what kind of society we would like to have and what AI's role in that society should be. Thank you.
Je vais encore poser une question.
Another question. You spoke of the European Union, I believe, about their legislation. Are there any similar examples that we could look to? Now I'm looking at the union world when talking about this and collective agreements, but what would motivate a government to create legislation on AI? What are they trying to organize and structure here? What's their motivation behind it?
Thank you again. In the EU AI Act, they've chosen to take the approach of essentially looking at high risk and low risk AI. And so the idea is that high risk AI is the type of AI that will have to go through a specific process, where like a more burdensome, let's say, authorization process, whereas low risk AI can essentially sail through. And high risk AI could be AI, for example, that's being used in situations where there is, the risk of harm to a person's, for example, their livelihood, their freedom, or their health, for example. So that's essentially the one approach that's being taken, and we'll see how it works in practice. Another interesting example is in Germany, and this has nothing to do with AI at all. This has been in place for a while, but essentially involves they essentially mandate worker consultation whenever any kind of technology is being introduced into the workplace and is essentially impacting on workers' working conditions. So I think it will also be interesting to see how that existing system is able to respond to the introduction of AI. It's not a piece of AI specific policy. It's been in place for a while. Those are just two examples of how people across the world are dealing with this challenge.
Merci, Madame Chabot. 4 seconds.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think the majority of my time, definitely on this round, will be with Mr. Carbonneau, please. So thank you all the witnesses. I wanted to just pick up on something in the testimony of Mr. Carbonneau on the net incomes being too low in Canada. And this is on my mind as relates to AI, is how do we protect the income of workers when their cognitive value, which is their ideas or their thoughts, are already captured, they're copied, they're scaled, and potentially they're monetized. And I'm wondering, how do we protect their cognitive IP? We always talk about, intellectual property, but how do we protect their cognitive property when it maybe only needs to be their thought that's been shared once, twice, 3 times, and it can be scaled and used?
That's definitely a big question, and I don't think I have a complete answer, and I'm not sure that anyone does. What I would say is that, in a broad sense, I think countries that do well in AI are going to be the ones that are able to develop acceptance for AI adoption and use in societies, and I think we'll have to answer those questions in some format, probably sooner rather than later. And we do have a bill before Parliament right now, Bill C-27, that sort of implementing a regulatory or a legislative framework to develop a regulatory framework around AI. And I think that there's a lot of scope there as that comes into force and the regulations are developed to be quite sensitive to what the future of those kinds of issues look like. And one thing I will just plug some of CCI's other work here is that we've released a roadmap on responsible AI leadership in, I think, early September. Time is kind of blurred this fall, as I'm sure it has for many of you. That really gets into some of these issues around public trust. And I think one thing that Parliament should strongly consider moving forward is creating a parliamentary science and technology officer that would play kind of an analogous function to what the parliamentary budget officer does, and very similar to what the sadly now defunct Office of Technology Assessment used to do in the U.S. Congress, and give yourselves as parliamentarians and the public timely, actionable information on emerging technology and science issues that I think would help inform a lot of these debates and give us, all kind of a level ground to understand a lot of these emerging technology issues. I think that's the kind of social infrastructure, if you will, or parliamentary infrastructure that could play a very, very helpful function addressing those kinds of issues and give us, I think, a better basis to do so.
Thank you for that. And I thank you for your submission to the written submission, because I know trust was one of the things that went into your written submission. I think one of the challenges with that is, does the average worker, does the average family in Canada have access to conversations around that? Do they have access to the decision-making process around that? And I think that's one of the things that plays on the trust, which is difficult, is that, yes, some other body might be created, but how do they get access points into that? And gets me thinking about, how does that interact with the conversations that are happening right now around basic income? Because it's almost as if workers will have less power, especially if a lot of the value of this AI technology is in servers that aren't in Canada, or the data isn't in Canada. So have there been discussions around how basic income intersects with artificial intelligence as it relates to incomes for people?
I'm aware that there are some, and this has been a topic of discussion, sort of at a high level, but I can't say, speaking for our members, that this is something that's come up a whole ton for us, just because I think this is a fairly remote prospect in terms of that being a reality.
All right, thank you. I'm actually going to move to Mr. Roberts, but it does worry me, even when I hear that, the talk is that we're consulting with manufacture and finance, when really we have a lot of women in the care economy, a lot of women workers that do care that aren't getting equal exposure in this conversation. So I'm going to move over to Mr. Roberts. Thank you so much for your testimony. And I guess one of the things that is on my mind, this committee is also persons with disabilities, that there's potential opportunity here for more equity in the workforce as it relates to persons with disabilities. And I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on how this could assist workers, and I think about marginalized workers too in the care economy, that have been undervalued, under-resourced, and underprotected in the economy.
Thank you for the question, and I had hoped to address this in my introductory remarks. I didn't have time, but I think you're absolutely right that for workers with physical challenges, for instance, AI applications have enormous potential to increase the participation of those workers. I think the surrounding investments in workers with disabilities are absolutely determinative as well. There has to be the openness to accommodating those workers, the arrangements and conditions that unions and disability rights advocates call for now also have to be included in the mix. There is no simple technological solution to the barriers and challenges that workers with disabilities face, but there's no question that there's potential in the technology. It's all about, again, how the technology is adapted and deployed and implemented in workplaces.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
One short question, Mr. Roberts.
One short question. So I'm just going to stay with Mr. Roberts on that then, and I just wanted to ask Mr. Roberts about conversations about incomes right now. Incomes are too low in Canada. We know that. We know that even income supports aren't keeping up with the cost of living in this country. Do the Labour group or the Canadian Labour Congress, do you see artificial intelligence being able to enhance incomes, be able to support more income protection programs? How do you see this affecting incomes of Canadians?
Short answer, the technology is not determinative. It's the conditions, the social structures that matter. That's why I don't agree that productivity is determinative in the short run. In the long run, it may shape and determine prosperity, but if productivity advances from AI flow entirely to the owners of these applications and the firms that deploy them, then it's not going to improve incomes for the lowest income earners.
Madame Zerillo, before we go to the second round, I just want to advise Ms. Lane, it's your option to stay. You can see a lot of the panelists want to speak to you, but when you choose to leave, just simply wave your hand and zoom out, but it's your call, Ms. Lane. Ms. Gray for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. My first questions will be for the Council of Canadian Innovators. And in your opening remarks, you had talked about low productivity not being normal for advanced economies. Those were your words. And I'm wondering if you can maybe explain that, go into a bit more detail what you meant by that.
Sure. I would just say that it's a very big question. I would just say that if you look at a lot of the things that we look at our standard of living, we look at our incomes, we look at a lot of these things. You would think, wow, this is a very productive economy, and you look under the hood, and it's less productive than you would expect. And there's kind of a lot of reasons for that that are historical, that have to do with industrial structure. But that's what I mean fundamentally.
Okay, and so how does that relate to the Canadian citizens? Like, what does that mean for Canadians and also for the business climate here?
Sure. So I'll pivot back to something Mr. Roberts said about this being not the be all end all, and I think that's entirely fair. It really does matter where the money goes in terms of it's all about how much wealth we are generating as a country, and then where the wealth goes is very much the stuff of politics, right? So that's all fair, and I don't disagree with that. I think to that point, the impact of this is how big or how wide is our horizon as a country? If we're not a very productive economy compared to our neighbors, then it just forecloses options for us in the future. It forecloses options in terms of how we deal with problems like climate change and reconciliation and poverty. It just limits the real resources that we have at our disposal in dealing with those social problems and in enjoying a high standard of living.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to, on this same topic, go over to the OECD representative and sort of on this topic, if you can maybe. Is she gone now? Okay, well we'll go back. We'll go back then. I know that she was going to at some point remove. So back to the Council of Canadian Innovators. So where are we trending right now?
In terms of productivity?
In terms of productivity, sort of staying on the same topic.
Yeah, so I mentioned this in my opening statement, but from 2018, I think Q2 to now, there's been little wobbles, but we're actually a little below where we were in Q2 of 2018, which is pretty worrying, right? Like you expect to see a low but reasonably consistent level of productivity growth, and having seen, and obviously these last 5 years have been odd in lots of different ways, but other countries have not had that experience. So that's very worrying, I think, if we continue to see that trend continue. And we hope it doesn't, but I think there are kind of some structural reasons to think that might continue to be the case.
And so how do we compare with other countries? Where are we sort of in a scale, I guess you could say? And then also, how do we compare with our largest trading partner, with the U.S.?
I can speak to the U.S. part. We are well behind. The U.S., there's a pretty big gap between sort of output per hour. The others, I honestly would have to get back to you a little bit. I did have a couple of comparisons in my statement there, saying we're sort of right around where Italy, Turkey, and Spain are, but I don't remember exactly the top 10 or however many.
So on the topic of the U.S., I did want to ask you because and you had your roadmap for responsible AI leadership in Canada, and you had referenced in here that the U.S. was doing work on this, and then just they came out this week with AI rules with the U.S. So I'm wondering if you can comment on if you've had a chance to go through those yet, and if you have any thoughts on those.
Yeah, I took a quick look, and I would say it's a pretty impressive suite of measures, and I think, broadly speaking, it's very good. It goes further than what we have as a legislative framework currently, which is frankly what you'd expect, right? I think the current AI bill is sort of saying, this is sort of how we will frame rules, and then let's create those rules. The executive order is really a very different approach, right? Because it's what they can do through executive action. But yeah, there are some really interesting measures in there around standards. There are some really interesting measures around audit of large language models that might have security implications. So yeah, overall, I think it's a really impressive piece of a really impressive package of work. I would have to look a little bit more into the details of how that's going to shake out. But I think our first impressions were reasonably positive.
Just one more quick question here. I'm almost out of time. Without going into the weeds at this point, do you think that there's some benefits for Canada to harmonize with countries like the U.S., maybe the other countries, and really looking at harmonization, and would that be something that Canada should look at considering? Absolutely,
yes. I think a short answer, because as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to scaling AI companies, Canada is not a huge global market, right? So if companies are able to compete globally from day one because our regulatory system is aligned with that of the EU, with that of the US, that is a very big advantage.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Kuzmarchuk for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and absolutely a fascinating and timely discussion as well, too. And, today President Joe Biden tweeted about his executive order on AI, and I know tomorrow the UK will be hosting an international summit on AI safety. And so, again, very, very timely discussion. I wanted to thank my colleague, Michael Coteau, for bringing this study forward to this committee. Mr. Roberts, I was very interested to read the report that was published by the CLC and the Pembina Institute that just came out in September, a Sustainable Jobs Blueprint. And it talks about how Canada can build a framework of supports that can help workers transition to a zero-emission economy. It's a great read, highly recommend it, and it really dovetails nicely with the legislation that's in front of Parliament right now, Bill C-50, that we brought forward. Can you maybe talk about some of the parallels or lessons from that conversation, from that process, and how it might apply to this conversation about, again, the challenges that whether it's AI, whether it's automation or digitization, and what lessons and parallels we can draw from that?
Thank you so much for the question. The labor movement for a long time has championed the notion of just transition to a sustainable economy. The idea being that workers have to see their own future in the new economy, otherwise they won't support moving to a net zero arrangement. So the idea was that workers have to participate in the process, they have to be involved, and their interests have to be included in the transition. The same goes for AI, I would argue. If workers are involved, if they see a pathway to a prosperous future for themselves, for their family, they will be involved. There will be a social license to participate. But that also means we have to think about digital skills, about digitalization of work as a similar transition to the transformations in work that will be required to move to a sustainable economy. And that means investing in labor adjustment mechanisms, ensuring that training is much more equitably distributed than it is today, that continuous and lifelong learning opportunities are available for mid-career workers, for instance, to adjust, and the like. So your analogy is very appropriate.
Do you have specific recommendations in terms of how the voices of labor and the voices of workers could be included in that conversation? And, our government has put forward over $400 million towards the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. We've got centers set up across the country looking at this issue. How do we get workers and labor, their voice, into that conversation?
Thank you again for the question. So Bill C-50 and the Sustainable Jobs framework contemplates a partnership council that will bring workers and industry and other interests together to address the skills and labor market programming needs to make that transition. We can similarly fashion institutions that bring in workers and their organizations into the process. There is an AI advisory council currently. Unfortunately, it's constituted exclusively by industry and academics. There's no civil society, labor, human rights advocacy organizations, etc. So that would be a starting point, is to create a body that can identify skills needs, identify programs that are required collaboratively, and instill some of that social license that's required. Then I think having sectoral tables as well that identify industry and sector specific needs in response to AI development and digitalization of work would take us a long way down the road.
Absolutely. I'm going to share the bulk of my time with my colleague, Mr. Fragiskatos.
We'll make it 30 seconds. Mr. Carbonneau, you mentioned productivity in general terms at the outset of your presentation. A few days ago, I met with a representative from the Canadian Home Builders Association who brought up permitting. We know that permits for housing at the municipal level take often a very, very long time to issue. Without getting into the reasons for that, because there are many, They mentioned AI. They mentioned AI as a solution to this. They pointed out that AI can approve a permit according to all the guidelines that municipalities would want approved in a matter of just a few minutes. Or a few hours if it's not a few minutes. What do you think about that? What do you think about that as a solution to housing challenges that are in front of the country right now?
I would say that there's a broad, I'll zoom out a touch, though keeping it short, that there's a broad opportunity for the public sector in general to use AI in a lot more of its operations. I think for that to be the case, I think the way that we kind of approach procurement will probably have to change a little bit to allow for more kind of back and forth dialogue between innovators and folks who want to buy innovation in the public sector. We have structures that don't really enable that right now. Innovation is essentially an iterative process, and that doesn't really flow with how things work right now. So I think that would be fantastic, and I think that there's obviously a lot of use cases for AI in the public sector, housing included, but we'd have to sort of look at those structures and say we can make them work better.
Mr. Fragas-Carros. Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demi.
C'est vrai, c'est juste 2 minutes et demie.
Okay, only 2.5 minutes. Hello, Mr. Roberts. The first question will be for you. On the topic of AI, I'm looking at the union environment, and especially in Quebec, they're trying to implement into collective agreements certain models because we have seen a lot of things that have already been automated in large companies. Let's say the car industry, and in Quebec, you spoke about the social dialogue. Over the last 25 years, we have had a commission that has brought together some of the most important stakeholders, which has been great. Now, that being said, I do have concerns because, and correct me if I'm wrong, the union environment can play a significant role in terms of our collective agreements, qualifications, training. But we know that in the private sector, the number of people who participate in unions is relatively low. So how can we ensure that workers who aren't represented by a union be protected? Let's talk about Uber, Airbnb, for example. These type of applications often, we could say, exploit those who are working for very low wages. This is also an issue. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. And I think the problem that you're pointing to is very important. I do think that collective agreements sometimes can set the pace for public policy statutory innovations that affect all workers. I think expanding access to unions is critically important for workers that want them, so that they can themselves lift their voices and play a role in shaping technological developments at work. I think for many ride-hail workers working for digital platforms, this question of misclassification of those workers is fundamental, and gaining access to the existing employment standards is the first step to getting some protections, basic protections that are reserved for workers in an employment relationship. I do think that there are combination of statutory, regulatory, and workplace level changes that can improve the circumstances for non-union workers as well.
Madame Chabot, Madame Zarrillo for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, am I up?
Yes.
I'm not hearing, so I'm assuming that I am.
Yes, Madame Zarrillo.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to ask Mr. Frenette, actually, from Stats Canada. One of the things that I would like to have testimony on in this study is just around income protection for workers and in improving an equitable workforce. So my question is really around the information that's collected, because of course we always hear that if we don't measure it, we can't reach our goals. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing what information does StatsCan have now in relation to income and equitable workforce as it relates to changes with AI in the workforce, and what would you recommend they collect as far as data?
Okay, so we've done one. So we don't collect we don't like have a regular program of AI and income per se. There is, in addition to the opening statement that I talked about earlier, some earlier work that I did that looked at not AI but automation risk. And what that found was that workers that were in more vulnerable positions in the labor market tend to be more at risk to having their job tasks automated, and that includes low-wage workers. So that was a one-off, and I don't know if my colleague Mr. Dale has anything else to add to that. We do have a regular program of income, I will say, but linking that to AI is not a regular program that I'm aware of.
If I might add a few ideas or a few thoughts, I might encourage the committee to think in terms of upstream and downstream types of data. So if we think of the upstream being the extent to which AI technology is being adopted in Canada, there are some significant challenges around that. As you've discussed, there isn't necessarily a commonly accepted definition of AI. But that being said, we are working with OECD and other international partners to make progress on that, what we would call a measurement challenge. And we have a couple of surveys that we have conducted that we can share with some partial results that we can share with the committee in writing if you would like. And then the downstream effect, which is more pertinent maybe to the question of income, we do through the labor force survey, other labor market information systems that we have, and the census, we can look at the evolution over time of employment by occupation and income by occupation. So we can see the downstream impacts of technology. It's challenging to separate the specific impact of technology from other factors that influence labor market conditions. But the short answer would be we have good, robust information on the income of Canadian workers.
Thank you so much. And I guess I would just ask to get that information that you offered to the committee. That would be wonderful. But I think about StatsCan was here recently. Oh, am I done? StatsCan was here recently, and they said 60% of...
Ms. Cirillo. We're over 3. Thank you. Mr. Aitchison for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually wanted to ask a question similar to what Mr. Fragaskatos asked about. I'm the critic in the Conservative Party for Housing, and it's been a passion of mine. I used to be a municipal mayor, and I recognize there are a lot of delays at the local level, particularly in building departments and planning departments. And so I actually wanted to give you a bit of time to elaborate a little bit more on how we could use AI and this technology to accelerate the process of getting things approved and built. And I'll let you run with that.
So to some extent, I might not be the best place to speak to the specifics of this. I do think, ultimately, if the issue is municipalities are just having throughput issues and they are able to get contract with to get an AI product or service from a provider that enables them to do this kind of work much more quickly, I think we should have frameworks that enable that. As I mentioned earlier, procurement, the way that it typically works is quite inflexible. There's a lot of needs definition that happens up front, and the specification tends to be very ironclad. It doesn't change once it's been established. So if you're a smaller company, or if you're an innovative company that's trying to do something new, it might not look exactly like what the spec said, right at the very beginning, but you're kind of locked into it, even if it necessarily wasn't the best idea or the best way to approach the problem. Mm-hmm. So I do think that a really big piece of this, as I said to Mr. Fragaskatos, is we have to kind of find ways for government to become better at buying innovation. And I think there are lots of different ways we can do that. CCI is going to have a report on this in the next month or two. I'd be very happy to share with you. But I think that's very key here, is that the public sector, I think, has access now to a lot more tools than it used to. But the procedures it uses to get access to them have not really kept up with that. And different countries like Finland, like the UK, have developed kind of new procedures and offices that are kind of tasked with doing what's called in the literature public procurement of innovation, and we are just not quite there yet.
This is one of those areas where there's actually this sort of, I don't know if it's a demographic issue, but it's certainly a skills issue. But a lot of municipalities are sort of facing this mass exodus of building professionals. For example, I've met with in Ontario the Association of Chief Building Officials, and a lot of them are getting close to retirement. There's not a lot of people coming up through. And so this is why I wonder about it as a tool, because what is an existing problem is only going to get worse if there are fewer people, and then of course you lose institutional memory and those years of experience in the community, in the industry, and so I'm hopeful actually that it. I guess I see the concern that some people may have that it's going to displace people, but I guess I also wonder if it's not really in many ways just the natural progression of technology changing how we do things. I think back to a speech I heard where someone was talking about innovation in the economy, and the point they made was that when they invented CDs, nobody cried big tears for the vinyl record industry because we stopped making those kind of. We don't. There's things we just don't make anymore because technology's changed it, and there's lots of jobs that exist today that didn't exist before. Like 20 years ago, there were lots of careers that exist today that no one had ever even dreamt of, and so I guess I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about. I mean. It seems exciting to me, and yet I also feel very much like the conversation around this is happening with some trepidation or something. Am I reading that right?
I think that's true, and I think that's fair. I will say off the top that vinyl has made a huge comeback.
It has. It's true, actually. That's a very good point.
But no,
it's cool again.
I think that's right, and I think what Mr. Roberts has said about kind of the social license piece of this is really important. I think people, and I mentioned, in my opening statement, we had electrification, we had industrialization, and those didn't always work out great for a lot of people, right? Like I think in many ways Luddites had a point. They had a very good point. They were broadly correct about their specific critique, right, which was that as skilled artisans making, as weavers, they were very affected by early industrial technology. So that was all fair. Perhaps didn't deal with it in the way that was the most productive, but that's all right. So no, I think it's very normal and natural for people to be concerned about potential displacement around this. Like I said in my opening statement, I think we're kind of far from that being really live. I don't think that's necessarily going to be true forever. I think that's on the order of decades here. But I think the earlier we start talking about this and we start talking about how do we want to use technology as a society, I think that's good, and I think that gives people room to do things that are productive and add to our wealth as a country and make us richer and add to our standard of living, but that people can feel confident in. And I think I'm really glad you guys are doing this study for specifically this reason. I think it's really good to have these conversations in Parliament that you guys can take home and have at barbecues, and really kind of start to build a bit of a social consensus around what's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison, Mr. Carbonneau. Mr. Van Bynen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were a couple of comments that you'd made earlier that are a bit of a concern to me, and that is that for people to adopt or adapt and implement AI, they need to be global, and that's largely because of the level of investment that's required. To some extent, I guess that would influence the timelines for adaptation. What type of a timeline do you see as far as adaptation and implementation?
Sure. So what I would say is that I think it's very hard to put an exact timeline on this, but I would say that we will probably Mr. Aitchison mentioned earlier about, these sort of gaps in workforce, of how, you'll have people age out before new people are kind of ready to come in. I think we might be looking at a mismatch if we don't kind of get serious about this in the next couple of years, because I think we're starting to see sort of the foot to go on the gas of AI adoption worldwide. I think if we kind of continue status quo and technology adoption historically in Canada among businesses has been slower than in other countries. I think if we continue along that historic path, we will end up behind in critical ways in AI, both in adoption, and I think we won't have the kinds of companies anymore that will be able to really grow here because the market just won't be there. It'll just be very, very tough for them. So I think we have a bit of an edge right now, and if we kind of don't do the right things in the next couple of years, we may very well lose it.
You mentioned another constraint would be our computing capacity, and I think you referenced the Canary setup. What type of investments would the government have to make sure that we improve that computing capacity in order to create the industry that we want to grow?
That's a very good question, and I can't speak to exact numbers here. This is something I've heard from companies, is that they're looking at compute capacity, access to computing, and this is starting to become quite expensive for a variety of reasons. So I think this is something we should just look at closely and maybe get a bit of more of a feel of across the industry what those numbers look like. But yeah, I can't speak to exact numbers, but it's definitely something we're hearing.
So a government-sponsored sandbox that would enable industry to work with some of that capacity.
Yeah.
Could be an answer.
Yeah.
Okay. My next questions are over to Stats Canada. Do you have the data on the share of businesses in Canada that work with artificial technologies? What's their contribution to the GDP, and what percentage of the labor market do they employ?
We do have a few surveys recently that have been conducted on this in terms of technology adoption, and including artificial intelligence. So we're not experts, both myself and Mr. Dale, in that particular area. That's on the business side. But we would like to circle back to the committee with more precise information on those very questions, if you don't mind.
The genie is out of the bottle, and we're seeing that the pace of innovation and the pace and the level of impact are going to be quite significant over a very short period of time. So I would like to see that some type of measurements would give us the scope and the scale of the issue and allow us to monitor progress in terms of reaching our goals. What would those elements be that you would be monitoring to provide the government with the kind of information that it would need to make fact-based future policy decisions?
So right now we're monitoring technology adoption, again, including artificial intelligence, and I think to have consistent data in order to establish trends is important. That word consistency is very important, and if we can add more information to that, if there's the possibility of looking at the extent of usage of artificial intelligence, that would be useful, in my opinion, from a researcher's perspective. But again, I would circle back to the experts on business surveys at Statistics Canada.
I'm close to running out of time. One quick question. Do you have any data that scales up or gives us the scope and the scale of what we have in terms of businesses that have been successful in implementing artificial intelligence technologies? And if you can't respond now, could you send us the information that you have that gives us the size of what the industry looks like today, so that could be a baseline of what we have, and we could measure what we're doing going forward? Could you provide us with, what information could you provide us with, and would you provide that?
We'd be more than happy to forward your question to the experts in that area at StatCan, and then we will get back to you promptly.
Okay, I think I'm out of time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Byna. For the benefit of the committee, because we do have committee business, I'm going to go 3 minutes to the opposition, 3 to the government, 2 minutes to Madame Chabot, and 2 minutes to Madame Zerullo to conclude this portion of the meeting. Ms. Gray for 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask a couple of questions to the representative from Statistics Canada. you had put out a report in July of this year on the changing nature of work, and it talked about acceleration in the last few years of a shift in Canadian workforce trends from manual labor to less manual labor. And your report shows that the share of employees who worked in, for example, managerial, professional, and technical occupations went from 23.7% in 1987 to 36% in 2022. While employees working in production, craft, repair, and operative occupations fell from 29.5 to just 20%. So 2 questions for you is, what effects do you think AI might have had on these workforce trends, if anything? And do you see any trends emerging over the next decade that you might be able to speak to?
I think if we're talking about the entire period from 1987 to basically today, for the most part, it's been automation. So we're thinking about robotics, think about the car manufacturing plants, basically technology that follows predetermined prescriptions. Do this in the event of that, right? That's automation. AI is far more intelligent, if you will, to borrow that term, much more human-like, and the sense is that this is not really permeated as much in the labor market, especially if you go back to the 80s, which is when the study began. So what's going to happen in the future? We don't know yet. We're always happy to report the trends up until now at Statistics Canada. We'll continue monitoring these things, and AI is expected to, according to experts, start becoming more visible in the economy in the years to come. At least its capability is expected to increase dramatically in the next few years, according to a lot of experts that are out there.
Great. Next question is, do you think that there should be anything that you should start tracking now that maybe you're not, that might involve this evolution of AI? Or are there any discussions around that where you should be maybe looking at different statistics going forward that you're not right now?
Again, I mean, specifically focusing on AI, and I think I responded to the previous MP about that, looking at the extent of AI adoption would be very useful. We might be looking at it right now, but I'm not a business side expert. This is what I believe would be important because adoption is one thing, but the extent, how much of AI is actually being used, can give you a better sense of where we might be going.
Thank you so much. I can just ask one more quick question here to the Council of Canadian Innovators. So when we had talked about looking potentially at other countries and what other countries are doing, do you think that AI is something that should be considered when we're looking at trade agreements? And I know that you had talked about intellectual properties in your opening statement. So we've only got a few seconds here left. If you have any comment on that, thank you.
Short answer is absolutely yes, and certainly if we're not doing it, others will. And I would point back to the renegotiation of NAFTA, which resulted in CUSMA. The digital trade chapter, I think we will look back on as something that has unfortunately not been super good for Canadian innovators. So I think we need to be quite sophisticated about these things because others already are with regard to IP, with regard to other things, and we need to kind of get to where they are.
Mr. Collins for 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, I want to talk about labor stability for a minute. We've heard from Mr. Frenette and Ms. Lane about the incredible pace in terms of what AI is doing to the workforce. Changes that used to happen in decades are now happening in a couple of years. And we're all interested in labor stability to ensure that there's no disruption to the economy and that people continue to work. I've watched with interest in terms of what happened with the Hollywood writers' strike, in terms of AI was at the focus there. And UAW's had many strikes now, and AI is at the heart of some of those discussions and those new agreements. And so in those instances, the collective bargaining agreements kind of take care of what happens with AI in the workforce. Conversely, in California, they've had a push against autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks on the roads, and that was driven by the union movement asking government to legislate those changes. So where do we draw the line between leaving some of these things, unions to their own devices and employers, to sort these things out through collective bargaining agreements, versus governments taking a proactive stand and saying, you know what, we're going to step in at the front of this process, and we're going to set the ground rules?
Terrific question. I think in all instances, unions would welcome a managed introduction of new technologies like AI. I think some of the explosions or confrontations that we see are often in reaction to the threat of instantaneous but sudden introduction in a very dramatic and disruptive fashion of new technologies. I think that beginning a debate, a societal debate, a public debate that's inclusive and that brings in various interests that you want to have involved in the conversation in order to have that social license, I think will help ameliorate the uncertainty, the lack of trust, and hopefully diminish some of the confrontations that we've seen around new technologies.
Okay. Very quickly, on the whole issue of transparency, you mentioned that a couple of times, and as did others. What should we be interested in terms of legislating something that drives transparency to ensure that everyone who's dealing with this issue, either through a collective agreement process or legislators who are looking for new language to implement in terms of protecting the workforce or sectors, what recommendations do you have in terms of what role we play in terms of driving transparency through those processes?
Great question. I think the sky's the limit. The White House executive order, for instance, explores the idea of requiring AI systems developers to share their data and their the results of their testing and their impact assessments with government, with regulators. I think that's important. I think, analogously, there is now a right to be informed about the introduction of potentially hazardous chemicals and materials in the workplace when it comes to health and safety of workers. I think you could think of an AI analogously. If there is the potential to have the introduction of a system that's going to have very transformative, disruptive impacts in the workplace, we could think about a right to for workers to be informed, to be have an opportunity to ask questions and learn about the consequences for their work, etc., be consulted, and then to have basic protections around labor adjustment, the right to retrain, upskill, and adjust.
Thank you, sir.
Pour 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Carbonneau, I would like to discuss with you, if I understood correctly, you see this more so as an opportunity rather than a threat for employment. And you spoke a lot about productivity. I'm not sure if we completely agree on what productivity means, but if we take the perspective of workers, concerning the current situation concerning labor, a lot of the trends that we're seeing right now are that of burnout, individuals who are overworked. If we look at the healthcare sector, for example, those who work at home or in medical centers. So we can look at a caseload level productivity. This has an effect on the quality of work as well. So now I heard that AI is not going to be replacing people, but rather replacing tasks. And so it will likely not be replacing workers. But now AI is a part of our firms, our institutions. We have new workers and those who are already there in the field. So how do we ensure that when we talk about productivity, that we're speaking not just about productivity for the benefit of the firm, but productivity for the benefit of workers and quality of work?
Je vais répondre en anglais.
Thank you. I'll respond in English.
Is really applicable here that, this is going to be a process that is going to be gradual and over time. And I think there's going to be, and as we've already seen, flare-ups around the use of AI in the workplace in various ways, and I think that's healthy and productive. I think the more that happens, and the more that we have broad discussions about how people's data is used in the workplace, and about privacy, which has been brought up earlier, about standard of work, about how productivity is measured just in the workplace without regard to sort of national statistics. These are all, I think, live questions, and I think that many of them are for the bargaining table, many of them are for regulation. I know the European Union's AI Act sort of has some of this built into it, defined as high-risk systems, and perhaps we'll follow suit with how we end up defining high-impact systems here. All that to say, I don't have hard answers, and I don't think anyone does. I just think that this will be a place where we're all going to have to figure it out together, and if we don't, I think we will end up in a place where we're not particularly competitive with regard to AI adoption and deployment.
Madame Chabot. Madame Zerillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm just going to go back to my question.
3 minutes, Madame.
3 minutes.
Zerillo for 2.
I was just going to go back to my question for Mr. Frenette, just on the when StatsCan was here last, they said that 60% of open jobs right now needed grade 12 education or less. And I'm just wondering if that's part of a trend. And if, as a research economist, if you think that the expansion of AI into the economy will affect the needed education levels of workers.
I believe Mr. Dale was here last time with those trends. But just to answer your second question, I think if technology is changing, then the needs of the labor market might be changing. So the skills required to work with that technology could change accordingly. So that's a bit of a general answer, but that would be a consensus view from economists.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Dale, did you want to make any comments?
Yeah, a couple of comments. So I would say, first of all, that the trend in job vacancies is at least superficially consistent with Dr. Frenette's research, which shows a shift in employment towards, I'll say, higher education jobs. We have to remember, though, that there's multiple factors acting on the labor market at any time, including technology, but also business cycle, interest rates, all sorts of factors that could explain that drop in job vacancies in higher education jobs. The one thing I'll highlight, though, and it's been said before, is the uniqueness of AI is that it represents a risk or a threat to jobs involving a high level of cognition. So it's not about replacing manual tasks, it's about replacing something like human intelligence. So in that sense, so as I've said, I wouldn't make a direct connection between the patterns in job vacancies and AI, but I would just suggest that people think in those terms. There's multiple factors at any one time. If AI is affecting the higher end distribution of jobs, that's a trend or an indicator to keep an eye on.
And overall, if we could just, and we're still keeping data, though, on our incomes are coming up and down. So can you just share with the committee, what is the trend right now for incomes in Canada? Are they going up or down over the last 20 years?
Yeah, it's a very complex topic. I wouldn't want to summarize that in a few words, but I'd be happy to give you a 1 or 2 page summary in writing if that would be okay.
Yes, please. Thanks so much.
Zerillo and Mr. Dale, if you provide that to the committee for Madame Zerillo, that would be good, as well as the others. With this portion of the meeting, we will suspend while we transition to in-camera to do committee business. Thank you to the panelists, witnesses who have appeared today. Those virtually, you can simply exit from the meeting, and Madame Zerillo, you will have to come back into the business portion with the different Zoom address. And those in the room, thank you, Mr. Carbonneau and Mr. Roberts, for interesting discussion. Thank you for coming. We'll suspend for 2 minutes? 3 minutes.
you.